Hey everybody, Matt here. Today in this video I'm going to show you how, and more importantly, why I made these. I'm calling them hollow blocks. So what I want to do is build some blocks so that when I cut some wood with my circular saw, I can prop the wood up that I want to cut on these blocks and not have to worry about cutting into my workbench. So I'm thinking something like this, where this is hollow. So 4 pieces of wood. I want to make the block square. Now I'm going to figure out what the dimensions for this needs to be. So in the past, I've always just used 2x4 blocks to prop up pieces of wood, but the blocks tend to get a little wobbly. Sometimes I stack a few blocks on top of each other, but again, that gets a little unstable. Blocks move around. So that's kind of what prompted me to make blocks that may be a little bit more stable. So just to double check sort of my thoughts here, if I take a look at my circular saw, the deepest it can cut, I can determine by lowering my base plate here as far as it can go. So that's as deep as it can cut. So if I take a standard 2x4 that's 3.5 inches this way and put it behind the blade, you can see that my circular saw can't cut all the way through a 2x4, the 3.5 inch dimension, all in one pass. It can't go that deep. So I think what I would like to do here is make my blocks 3.5 inches tall, and because they're going to be square, I'll also make them 3.5 inches wide. So if I go back to my sketch here, I've just decided that this wants to be 3.5 inches and this wants to be 3.5 inches. So if you've seen any of my other videos, you probably have realized that I'm a big fan of reusing scrap wood. So this is a pretty thick piece of particle board from a piece of furniture one of my neighbors was getting rid of. So what I'd like to do is clean this up with a belt sander and then use the table saw to cut the pieces to make the blocks. So this is actually a pretty thick piece of particle board. If I throw a ruler on it, I'm going to call that 1 1/8 inches. So if I go back to my sketch, I've just decided to use an old piece of particle board, and this measures 1 1/8 inches thick. So I'm going to need pieces that are 3.5 inches by 1 1/8 inches. Haven't decided on the length yet. And because I've got 1 1/8 inches and 1 1/8 inches here, that's 2 1/4. And I want the overall dimension to be 3.5. Right? So 3.5 minus 2 1/4 is 1 1/4. This is the belt sander I'm going to use. It's got 80 grit sandpaper on it right now, so it's fairly coarse. This is going to be a pretty dusty operation, so this dust capture bag will come in very handy. So here's a little trick I do when I clean up reclaimed wood, like that piece of particle board I'm going to use. I'm going to take, surprise, surprise, another piece of reclaimed particle board, and I'm just going to take some standard clamps and I'm going to clamp it onto the end of my bench. And what this does is it creates a kind of stop. So the wood can't fly off the end of my bench as I'm belt sanding it. So because this is such a dusty and actually noisy operation, I'm going to be wearing a respirator. It's actually rated for paint fumes. I'm going to be wearing eye protection just so I don't get the dust in my eyes, and of course hearing protection because the belt sander is kind of loud. So this is how they cleaned up with a belt sander. One of the challenges with working with reclaimed scrap wood is that it's not very flat, but I think I should be able to clamp it into position and get it to bend the way I want to. I actually have two pieces that are roughly the same, must have been for the same piece of furniture. And so this is what they look like after I sanded them off. So I just used my Shopsmith in table saw mode to rip down those pieces of particle board. So I've got 4 strips that are 3.5 inches wide and 4 strips that are 1.25 inches wide. Alright, now that I have my strips cut, I need to decide how long I want to make the blocks. My strips are about a little over 42 inches long, and most of the time I think I'm going to be using these blocks when I'm cutting sheet goods that are either 2 feet wide or 4 feet long. That's about what this table is, and the reason for that those limiting dimensions is the small car that I have right now. The biggest piece of sheet goods that I can carry in it is about 2 feet by 4 feet, and these are readily available at the big box home improvement stores. So if I build these first set of blocks so that I can cut either a 2 foot wide sheet, or if I put a couple of blocks end to end, I can cut a 4 foot wide sheet. I think that'll be good to start with. Since my strip is just over 42 inches long, there's the 2 foot mark, that'll leave me about an 18-inch section to make another set of blocks. So that's what I'm going to do. Alright, so I've got my 24-inch strips cut. I have 4 of them. That left me with 4 pieces that are about 18 inches long. These are 3.5 inches wide. Now I have to decide how long I want to make the strips. So I'm starting to think about how I'm actually going to use these blocks. And what I'm going to do is wind up clamping these blocks to the end of my table using these clamps. Now this clamp can reach about 3 inches or so. Yeah, about 3 inches. So I'd like to be able to clamp the block. I'd like to be able to go all the way in, so I need at least 3 inches of open space, top and bottom, which means the in-between piece should start maybe at 3.5 inches and go for some distance. Okay, so I want each one of the ends open 3.5 inches from the end, and then maybe an opening in the middle as well to give me more clamping options. So let me work that out here on a piece of paper. So I've got my 3.5 inch wide strip that's 24 inches long. And back from each end, 3.5 inches, I want to have open so the clamp can reach the side of the block, the bottom or the top. So my in-between piece is going to start here, and then it's going to stop someplace in here to leave an open space in the middle. So we know half of 24 is 12. 12 minus 3.5. Take out another phone, the calculator. 12 minus 3.5 is 8.5. So this distance is 8.5. But I want to go back half of 3.5. So 3.5 divided by 2 is 1 3/4 inches. So this space is 1 3/4 inches. So 8.5 minus 1 3/4 inches is 6 3/4 inches. So basically, it looks kind of messy in my sketch here, but basically what I'm saying is if I cut 2 strips that are 6 3/4 inches long, that I'll leave a 3.5 inch gap here, and a 3.5 inch gap here, and a 3.5 inch gap here. So let's just double check that. So 6 3/4, I'm going to have 2 of them, plus 6 3/4, plus, and I'm going to have 3 gaps that are 3.5 inches. If I've done the math right, it should add up to 24, which it does. So that's what I need, is I need to cut these strips 6 3/4 inches long. So at this point I have my long boards cut and I have the in-between boards cut. And what I did was I went ahead and drew a line from each end of the board in 3.5 inches. So the way I'm going to assemble these is I'm going to take the in-between boards, little blocks, and line up the end of the in-between board with the line I just drew. Something like that. And then the remaining board goes on top. Something like this. So what that leaves me with is a block that's 3.5 inches tall, 3.5 inches wide, nice and stable, with 3 spaces in between, one on each end and one in the middle. And the spaces are designed to allow my clamp full reach. So the thought is that these blocks should be pretty versatile depending on how I want to clamp them and what I actually need to do. Now, because the original intention was to prop up sheet goods while I'm cutting it with a circular saw, I don't want to use any metal fasteners here, nails or screws. So for the time being, I'm just going to use Type Bond original wood glue to hold all the pieces together. I suspect that will be strong enough, but if not, the next thing I would do is drill some holes and push some dowels in with some extra glue for some additional strength. So we'll see if I actually need to do that or not. So at this point, I'm ready to glue them up. So I've got the blocks all glued up. I'm taking a look at the rough surface here of the particle board. And I think what I'm going to do is take some of this Titebond glue and actually just paint the surface to try and help it from sort of crumbling away over being used. So here's the first one. So we'll just let this glue soak in. And the idea here is that maybe this will help keep particle board together a little bit longer. So I've got them all painted up now with the glue. We'll let these dry, paint up the ends, the other side, give them a light sanding, and throw a coat of paint on them, and then call them done.